You did not find your way to this moment by chance. As the noise of the world grows louder and the new year looms like another blank page waiting to be filled, something deeper inside you has begun to stir. It's not urgency, it's not panic, it's a quiet realization, a feeling that this time something must truly change, not the surface, not the habits, but the foundation. You're not just tired of being distracted or overwhelmed. You're tired of being at war with yourself. And that's where this moment meets you. Not as a motivational high, but as a return. A return to the part of you that wants stillness, that craves clarity, that remembers what it means to feel whole. The Stoics believed that the answers we seek aren't out there, not in status, not in chaos, not in someone else's approval, but in how we choose to respond to life itself. They didn't chase freedom, they practiced it one breath at a time. And if that resonates, if you're ready to walk a path of strength, reason, and quiet power, please subscribe. For you, let this be your first act of commitment to a life lived deliberately, one step closer to becoming the person you were meant to be. Most people wait for the collapse before they listen. They wait until the walls of their life begin to shake, until the job falls apart, the relationship disintegrates, the motivation disappears. Then they scramble for answers. But the signs were always there, quiet, subtle, ignored. That restlessness you feel when you're doing everything right but still feel wrong inside. That's the first tremor. That constant loop of anxious thoughts, even when nothing's technically going wrong. That's the second. These are not random discomforts. They are warnings from the soul, signals that you've been living outwardly successful but inwardly disconnected. The real earthquake never starts in your schedule. It starts in your perception. You've been so busy reacting that you forgot what it means to respond with intention. Each day you move through without reflection, each emotion you obey without understanding, each decision made out of pressure instead of principle. These are the silent fractures, and eventually they split everything wide open. It's easy to blame the world for the chaos, the deadlines, the noise, the expectations. But look closely. It's not the world that spins you into distress. It's your unawareness of your own mind. You've given up authorship and settled for reaction. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Yet most people never question their reaction at all. They feel anger and speak without pause. They feel afraid and run. They feel tired and quit. No pause, no filter, no thought, just instinct. But you're not an animal. You're not a machine. You're a thinking being, a soul with depth. And depth requires reflection. Every transformation begins at the same moment. The moment you stop saying, "I don't know why I do this," and start asking, "What am I choosing to ignore?" That's where awareness lives. It doesn't arrive with a bang. It's quiet. It's the moment you look at a routine and realize it's just repetition, not purpose. It's when you feel anxiety, not as a punishment, but as a message. Your mind trying to wake you up. You don't need to burn your life down to change it. You need to stop sleepwalking through it. When you live in reaction, every minor disruption becomes a crisis. One email ruins your mood. One glance makes you question your worth. One mistake makes you spiral. It's not because life is cruel. It's because you haven't learned to return to yourself. That's the thing Stoicism teaches better than anything else. Your mind is your home. And when you don't clean it, anything from outside can take over. You cannot control the winds of the world, but you can build walls around your inner fortress. The earthquake isn't trying to destroy you. It's trying to expose what you've built on unstable ground, and what collapses under pressure was never strong enough to hold you in the first place. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, It will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's the truth most people avoid. They don't want to admit that their suffering is often rooted in their own blindness, because that would mean they're not victims. It would mean they're responsible. But responsibility is not blame, it's freedom. When you realize that you've been living in patterns you never questioned, you stop chasing new outcomes with old behavior. You pause, you reflect, and slowly you shift. Awareness is the birthplace of all change, but it's also uncomfortable. It forces you to stop pretending. You'll see how much of your day is driven by fear, fear of missing out, fear of falling behind, fear of not being enough. You'll see how much you've confused busyness with purpose, how many things you do, not because they matter, but because they distract you from what does. That confrontation can feel like a breakdown, but it's not. It's a breakthrough, because only when the false self begins to unravel can the real self step forward. This is why 2026 has to be different, not louder, not faster, not more goals and resolutions layered on top of a cracked foundation, but deeper, more honest, rooted. You are not here to perform a new version of the same identity. You are here to return to the truth beneath the noise. The inner earthquake doesn't come to destroy your life. It comes to show you where you've been living without presence, where you've made comfort more important than growth, where you've allowed the loudness of the world to drown out the wisdom of your own soul. And when you choose to meet that disruption with awareness instead of panic, with reason instead of reaction, everything changes. Not because the world gets easier, but because you get clearer, stronger, quieter inside. And from that quiet, you don't just survive life, you begin to shape it. So the question is no longer, how do I stop the earthquake? The question is, what have I been building on unstable ground? Because once you see it, you can rebuild. Once you feel it, you can listen. And once you decide to wake up, you'll never go back to sleep. Not because it's easy, but because the alternative, the numb repetition of unconscious existence, is no longer bearable. Growth begins the moment you stop running from your own tremors and start walking directly into their source. It begins now. There's a place inside you that doesn't move when the world does. It doesn't tremble when someone criticizes you. It doesn't collapse when plans fall apart, and it doesn't beg for approval to feel whole. The Stoics called it the inner citadel, not because it was a fantasy or an idea, but because it was real, alive, and always present. Somewhere along the way, you stopped visiting it. Life pulled you outside of yourself. It wrapped you in conversations, obligations, identities. You started to believe that your peace was something you had to earn, fight for, or be granted by the people around you. But the truth is, peace was never out there to begin with. It's been locked away, not because it was stolen, but because you stopped remembering where the door was. Every moment of panic you felt, the shallow breathing, the racing thoughts, the way your body tightens before your mind even knows why, it all stems from the same belief that the world can reach into your chest and control what lives there. That someone's words, someone's silence, someone's rejection can break the foundation of who you are. But it can't. It only feels that way when you're disconnected from your own center, when your self-worth has drifted so far into the hands of others that you forget who truly holds the keys. The fortress isn't built of stone. It's built of stillness. It's not defended by walls, but by awareness. The more you remember that, the less you'll flinch every time life pushes back. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." And that's the trap most fall into. You don't need chaos to feel overwhelmed. You only need to think in chaos. You don't need real threats to feel fear. You only need to believe the voice in your head when it tells you that you're not safe, not enough, not in control. That voice doesn't come from your citadel. It comes from everything you've absorbed from the outside. The world taught you to compare, to rush, to win approval, to prove your worth. But your inner fortress never asked you to perform. It only asks you to return. There's a strange kind of suffering that happens when you try to fix what isn't broken. You search for validation, try to be more productive, push yourself to be better, thinking peace will follow. But peace isn't the reward for self-criticism, it's the byproduct of self-trust. You don't gain strength by adding more. You gain it by stripping away everything that never belonged to you in the first place. That's what the fortress offers, a space untouched by the outside world. No matter how loud life gets, it can't reach what's rooted in stillness. Most people believe they'll finally be at peace when the noise stops, when the world softens, when people treat them better, when things go their way. But that's a fragile peace. It lasts only as long as your conditions are met. And when they're not, when someone misunderstands you, when the future changes suddenly, when you're left standing in the wreckage of what you thought was certain, what then? The fortress is not about escaping life. It's about being unshaken by it. Because once you remember how to sit inside your own presence, nothing outside of you can control what happens next. You don't rebuild this fortress by force. You return to it in silence, in honesty, in moments when you tell yourself the truth, even when it hurts. You remember that you are not what others see in you. You are not your status, not your income, not your mistakes. You are not even the thoughts you've grown used to believing. You are the awareness behind them, the observer who gets to choose what stays and what goes. Seneca once said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." And maybe that's what this moment is for. Not to avoid discomfort, but to remember that it cannot break you, not unless you forget who you are. Every emotion that disturbs you is asking the same question. Have you left the fortress? When you feel anxious, you've begun measuring yourself against something outside of your control. When you feel angry, you've placed your calm in someone else's hands. When you feel desperate, you've tied your peace to an outcome. That's not weakness, that's forgetting. And the antidote isn't to win more, it's to come back to yourself, to realize that the door to your calm has always been open, but you've been knocking on everyone else's. There is no amount of success, attention, or certainty that can replace the power of being centered. And when you return to that inner citadel, you don't become cold, you become clear. You don't reject the world, you walk through it differently. You speak with less urgency. You respond instead of reacting. You protect your time, your focus, your values. Not with aggression, but with quiet strength. Because now you remember what belongs to you and what never did. Aristotle said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." But it's not just knowing your name, your job, or your history. It's knowing the part of you that cannot be touched by loss. The part that doesn't rise and fall with the applause. The part that remains when everything else changes. That's the version of you the fortress holds. And the more you meet that version, the less dependent you become on circumstances lining up perfectly. Carl Jung described the self as a circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. The fortress in this way is not a place to hide, it's a way to live. To move through the world while still being rooted in something deeper. To hold joy without clinging. To feel sorrow without crumbling. To be praised without pride. To be rejected without shame. It is not indifference, it is internal order. And that is rare. That is powerful. You won't be reminded often to go there. The world will pull at you endlessly, seduce you into reactivity, distract you with performance. That's why you must remind yourself. When you wake up, when you lose focus, when someone's words start echoing too loudly, pause. Ask yourself, have I left the fortress? And then choose to return, not through escape, but through presence, through breath, through letting go of what is not yours to carry. The fortress is not a fantasy, it is your birthright, but it must be remembered, maintained, and walked into daily. The storm can rage, the winds can scream, but when your foundation is within, you are no longer pulled in every direction. You don't need everything to be calm. You just need to remember where calm truly lives. And it's here, always, waiting for you to come back. Most people spend their entire lives trying to fix what was never theirs to control. They rearrange their days around unpredictable outcomes, obsess over how they're perceived, and cling to the belief that peace will come when everything outside finally settles. But life doesn't work that way, and deep down, you already know it. You've felt it every time you tried to control someone's opinion and ended up exhausted. Every time you planned the perfect future and watched it collapse. Every time you gave your energy to things that never once asked for your permission. There's a quiet kind of suffering that grows from the illusion of control, because no matter how tightly you grip, the world still moves the way it wants to. But here's the truth that sets everything straight. Control is not a feeling, it's a choice. And it's not about the world, it's about you. You don't get to choose what happens. You don't get to guarantee outcomes or lock down the behavior of others. But you do get to choose how you respond. You get to decide what kind of person you'll be in the face of uncertainty. That choice might not feel as powerful as dominating your environment, but it's the only kind of power that can't be taken from you. That's what the Stoics called the dichotomy of control, the difference between what is yours and what is not. And once you learn to live by that line, everything becomes clearer. Think about how much energy you've poured into trying to control what's unchangeable. The missed calls, the silence, the job you didn't get, the person who didn't understand you. You analyze, you overthink, you brace for the worst, all to feel prepared. But worry is not preparation, it's just resistance dressed up as strategy. And it drains you. What if all that effort could be reclaimed and redirected toward what you actually can shape? Your thinking, your intentions, your character. Imagine the strength you'd build if you stopped trying to bend the world and instead learned to stand calmly within it. And they do pass. Every emotion, every high, every panic. It comes and goes. But your choices, those remain. How you carry yourself when someone disappoints you, how you speak when anger rises, how you move forward when plans fall through. These are your domain. They shape your life more than anything you can't control ever will. The Stoics never promised ease. They promised clarity, because with clarity, you stop wasting your strength on storms you were never meant to stop. Seneca reminded us that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And if you look closely, most of your suffering hasn't come from events themselves, but from your resistance to them. You thought control meant changing the outcome, but real control is about changing the interpretation. The moment you stop needing everything to go your way is the moment you start to experience true peace. Not because life gets easier, but because your mind becomes steady. So many people confuse control with tension. They think being in control means being on edge, ready to correct, to fix, to anticipate. But that's not control. That's fear. And fear makes you reactive. It tricks you into believing that effort equals certainty. But the Stoic doesn't live for certainty. The Stoic lives for alignment, with reason, with virtue, with what can be known and chosen. When you align with what's in your power, you stop reacting to everything else. And you find a strange kind of calm that can't be touched by praise, by blame, or by chaos. There's a deep kind of relief that comes when you finally stop trying to manage the uncontrollable, when you stop checking your worth against someone else's behavior, when you stop trying to script conversations or chase outcomes, when you simply do your part, fully, honestly, with intention, and let go of the rest. That's not passive, that's mastery. It takes strength to focus only on your side of the equation. It takes clarity to let the world spin while you remain still. That stillness is not detachment, it's not indifference, it's wisdom. Epictetus said it plainly: freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. That kind of freedom doesn't feel like force. It feels like breath, like room in your chest, like space in your mind. When you no longer carry the burden of outcomes, you begin to walk differently. You make decisions not out of desperation, but from clarity. You speak not to control how others hear you, but to reflect your own integrity. You give without strings. You let go without panic. You live without needing to grip everything so tightly. The world will keep moving. People will still misunderstand you. Things will break, shift, surprise you. That doesn't change. But what can change, what must change, is your relationship to all of it. You're not here to micromanage life. You're here to show up in your role, to do your part, to act with intention. Then release. Not because it doesn't matter, but because that's where your responsibility ends, and real power begins. Even Aristotle, long before modern psychology echoed the idea, emphasized the importance of voluntary action. He believed that virtue lies in choice, not in emotion, not in reaction, but in deliberate, intentional movement. So the question isn't, can I control this? It's, is this mine to control at all? And if it's not, then it's not yours to suffer over either. When you understand this, you start to protect your peace like you protect your time. You don't give it away to people's opinions. You don't offer it up to news cycles, to market swings, to someone else's emotional weather. You learn to say, this is not mine, and you leave it. That's not avoidance, that's clarity. And clarity builds peace, not the temporary kind, but the kind that lives under your skin, that holds you steady when everything else moves. In a world obsessed with outcomes, you'll look different, calmer, less reactive, harder to shake. People might even misunderstand your calm as not caring, but you'll know the truth. You're not detached, you're focused. You're not cold, you're clear. You've simply stopped giving away the most valuable thing you have, your response, to things that never deserved it. Control is not something you find, it's something you choose. And the more you practice choosing what's yours, the more powerful you become. Not because you can manipulate the world, but because the world no longer manipulates you. That's the kind of strength no one sees coming, the kind that isn't loud, but changes everything, starting with you. You've probably felt it, like life is pressing back against every step you take. No matter how hard you plan, push, or prepare, something always veers off course. Delays, detours, disappointments. You brace yourself, you try harder, and still, nothing seems to bend the way you want it to. So you push again. You overthink, you control, and slowly, without realizing it, you become the one turning peace into a battlefield. But life is not something to overpower. It's not something to dominate into stillness. It's a river, and rivers don't yield to force. Most people aren't tired because they've been moving too fast. They're tired because they've been resisting everything that moves. They're exhausted not from effort, but from friction, from trying to rewrite what already is. You can feel it when you're in that state. Every little inconvenience feels like an insult. Every challenge becomes personal. But the truth is, life isn't attacking you, it's just flowing. And if you keep trying to stand still in the middle of that current, it's going to pull you under. Not because it's cruel, but because that's what rivers do when you try to control their direction. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. That's the misconception. People hear acceptance and think weakness, but acceptance is strategy. Letting go is not about sitting down and doing nothing. It's about choosing not to waste energy on what can't be changed. That's strength. That's clarity. That's where your real power starts to show. Because when you stop trying to fight the current, you learn how to navigate it, how to use it, how to move with it instead of constantly against it. There's a certain grace in learning to pivot instead of push. In recognizing when it's not the plan that needs more effort, but the mindset that needs to shift. You don't always need a better method. Sometimes you just need to stop demanding that life match your expectations. The Stoics didn't believe in passivity. They believed in precision, in seeing what is, not what you hoped it would be. It's easy to get caught in the illusion that control equals safety. But if that were true, the most controlling people would be the most at peace, and we both know that's rarely the case. Control doesn't quiet the mind. It agitates it, because it places your peace in things that were never meant to be predictable. The market, the weather, someone else's behavior, a timeline that won't cooperate. And every time you demand that these things stay still for your comfort, you hand your well-being over to chaos. That's not strength, that's dependency. What you need isn't to stop the river, it's to understand its flow. Some days that means adjusting, other days it means pausing, and sometimes it means letting go of the very thing you thought you needed. That's not failure, that's movement, forward, adaptive, intelligent. Carl Jung once wrote, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." That's the truth we all run from. The more you resist a situation, the more power it gains over you. But the moment you release the need to fight, the thing that felt so overwhelming suddenly shrinks. Not because it changed, but because your relationship to it did. You've probably seen it in your own life. The conversation you dreaded but finally had, and realized it wasn't as catastrophic as you feared. The job you lost that opened a door you never would have considered. The plan that failed but made space for something better. Those moments didn't come from force. They came from trust. Not blind trust in fate, but trust in your ability to respond to whatever comes. That's what navigating the river means. Not floating aimlessly, but guiding yourself with presence, not panic. You start to realize that every time life doesn't go your way, it's not necessarily going the wrong way. You just don't see the full picture yet. And that's okay. You're not supposed to. You're here to engage with what's in front of you, not to control what's ahead. That distinction changes everything. It lifts the weight you've been carrying. The need to predict, to force, to manipulate outcomes. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care smarter. You move wiser. You adapt faster. Because your peace is no longer held hostage by the need for life to follow your script. Epictetus reminded us that events are neutral. What changes their impact is our judgment. So the flood isn't the enemy. The twist in the current isn't failure. It's just movement. And your strength lies in how you meet that movement. Will you tense up and sink? Or will you learn to float, to breathe, to adjust your course and keep going? Even Plato in his own way spoke of this adaptability. He believed that the soul becomes wise not through force, but through recognition of patterns, of truths, of alignment with what is. Wisdom is not rigidity, it's flexibility with purpose. And when you cultivate that kind of internal flexibility, nothing breaks you. You bend, you shift, you stay whole. So if you've been feeling worn down, tired from trying to hold everything together, it might not be because you're weak. It might be because you're still trying to stop a river with your bare hands. And maybe it's time to stop gripping and start gliding. Maybe it's time to let go, not in surrender, but in strategy. To move with the flow, not against it. Because what you resist will wear you out. But what you engage with, What you learn to ride, to navigate, that's what turns you into someone unshakable. This year is not asking you to fight harder. It's asking you to move smarter, to stop demanding that everything bend to your will and start noticing how much easier life becomes when you work with its rhythms instead of against them. That's not giving up, that's growing up. It's trading control for clarity, panic for presence, resistance for direction. Let go. Not because you don't care, but because your energy is too valuable to waste on a fight that doesn't lead anywhere. Let go so you can finally move. Most people wait for perfect conditions to feel okay. They wait for the sun to come out, for the wind to settle, for life to hand them the ideal moment before they act, grow, or breathe again. But life doesn't work like that. The weather changes. Sometimes it rains when you need light. Sometimes the storm lingers far longer than you thought you could endure. But still, you're not powerless. Because your power was never in controlling the sky. It was in how you tended the ground beneath your feet. Think of your mind as soil. It holds the potential for everything. Growth, beauty, strength, but also decay. Neglect it, and it doesn't stay neutral. It grows whatever is planted, intentionally or not. That's where most people go wrong. They wait, they get distracted, and while they're looking up at the sky, wondering when life will be easier, the weeds start creeping in. Quietly, subtly. Thoughts of doubt, habits of avoidance, small fears that grow roots. And before long they wake up in a garden they don't recognize, a life that doesn't reflect who they truly are. But here's the truth. You don't need perfect weather to grow something beautiful. What you need is daily care. You need to notice what's growing and ask yourself if you put it there. You need to remove what doesn't belong, not with force or frustration, but with presence. The mind is not a battlefield, it's a garden, and even when it's been neglected, it will respond to care. That's the miracle of it. No matter how overgrown it gets, it can still be restored if you start today. So ask yourself, what are you watering? What are you feeding daily? Every repeated thought is a seed. Every habit is water. Every ignored emotion is a root system forming quietly beneath the surface. And just because you can't see the damage immediately doesn't mean it isn't happening. Over time, neglected thoughts become patterns. Patterns become identity. And identity becomes fate. But fate isn't fixed. It's just a result of what you've cultivated, consciously or not. Seneca wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." In a world that keeps telling you to do more, chase more, control more, the real power lies in simplicity, in tending to your own space, in realizing that wealth isn't external, it's internal. It's a peaceful mind, a clear intention, a set of values that can't be shaken by temporary storms. The danger is when you start blaming the weather, when you forget that every gardener has to deal with wind, heat, and rain. The difference is how they prepare, how they adapt, how they show up each day anyway, regardless of the forecast. That's what Stoicism teaches, not indifference but discipline, not withdrawal but clarity. You don't wait for peace, you build it, one thought at a time, one routine, one morning you didn't skip, one truth you finally accepted. And what about the frost? The hard days that burn through your hope and leave you wondering if anything good can grow again. Those days are part of the process. They prune you, they test the roots. They teach you what can survive, what was shallow, and what must be replanted. You don't run from those seasons. You learn from them. You observe. You adjust. You let them refine your focus so that when the warmth returns, you know exactly what to grow next. Aristotle once reflected that we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. This isn't about grand gestures. It's about returning to the soil every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, to weed out what doesn't serve you, to nurture what does, to believe that even on the days when progress is invisible, your presence is making a difference, because it is. Every time you pause before reacting, you tend your soil. Every time you choose clarity over chaos, you reinforce your roots. Every time you resist the urge to compare yourself to someone else's harvest, you protect your peace. That's what a real gardener does. They don't envy another garden. They focus on their own. This is your space, your mind, your values. And yes, the storms will come, but storms pass. Weeds can be pulled, soil can be renewed. What matters most is that you don't abandon it, that you don't hand your garden over to the world and ask it to take care of what only you can. Your inner world isn't the world's responsibility, it's yours. And the more you honor that, the more unshakable you become. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That strength is not loud, it's not explosive, it's steady, quiet, rooted. It's the kind of strength that doesn't need to prove itself because it's already done the work. It doesn't argue with the weather, it adapts, it keeps going, it grows, no matter what. So maybe this isn't the year to control everything. Maybe it's the year to care for what's already yours, your thoughts, your space, your presence. Let the storms come. Let the winds rise. You have tools, you have discipline, you have choice, and most of all, you have the garden. Don't wait for peace to fall from the sky. Plant it, water it, protect it. It's already inside you, and it's been waiting for your return. Something happens, you're late, the meeting already started, a payment didn't come through, someone said something that stung. In that instant, the event is real, but what you feel, that comes after. That comes from you. It comes from the story you attach to it, the meaning you assign without even realizing. Suddenly, being late means you're undisciplined. Losing money means you're doomed. An insult means you're not enough. But none of that is fact. It's judgment. And judgment, more than the event itself, is what actually breaks you. We often think pain comes from the outside, but it's not the world that cuts so deeply. It's the blade we turn inward, every time we believe a thought without testing it. This is the part most people miss. The mind doesn't just record reality, it interprets it, and interpretation is everything. That's why two people can experience the same situation and walk away with entirely different truths. One sees failure, the other sees feedback. One sees rejection, the other sees redirection. Same moment, different story, and that story determines everything that follows. This is where Stoicism becomes something far more human than people give it credit for. It's not about ignoring emotion. It's about understanding where that emotion is born. The majority of our pain doesn't come from the thing itself. It comes from the spiral that follows, the assumption, the internal blame, the mental forecasting of everything that will now go wrong. One simple moment snowballs into a catastrophe, but only because we gave it momentum. Carl Jung spoke often about the power of projections, the unconscious stories we place onto others, onto situations, onto ourselves. And until we see those projections clearly, we don't live in reality. We live in distortion. If someone criticizes you and your mind immediately whispers, "They must think I'm a joke," that judgment will shape not only how you feel, but how you act. You withdraw, you get defensive, you change who you are to avoid it happening again. All of that because of one silent interpretation that might not even be true. And what makes this especially dangerous is how fast it happens. A glance, a tone, a delay, And before you've even had a chance to pause, the judgment has already written a chapter in your head. That's why the Stoics practiced something so radical for their time: emotional awareness without attachment. They trained themselves to pause before judgment, to ask, what am I telling myself right now? Is it helping me? Is it even true? Most people never ask that. They let the thought become the truth. But thought is not truth. It's a lens, and lenses can be cleaned. Aristotle noted, it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. In other words, you can notice an emotional reaction without letting it take over. You can observe a judgment rising and still choose to sit with it rather than submit to it. This is not suppression, it's sovereignty. Because when you blindly obey your judgments, you lose control of your experience. But when you slow down and investigate, you create space. And in that space, you reclaim choice. This practice isn't glamorous. It won't impress a crowd, but it will save you from unnecessary suffering. It will keep you grounded when the world wants to pull you into drama, into fear, into the trap of overthinking. You don't need to become a monk. You don't need to silence every feeling. But you do need to get honest about the voice inside that labels everything before you even realize it. Let's be clear, there are real things worth grieving, worth fighting for, but clarity matters. If someone disrespects you, that's a problem. But assuming that means you're worthless, that's your judgment speaking, not truth. If you fall short of your own standard, learn from it. Don't bury yourself in shame. Shame is often just judgment turned inward, and it grows in silence, in the places you never challenge. The Stoics were not emotionless. They were disciplined. They understood that feelings are not enemies, but they are not rulers either. Feelings point towards something, but they don't always tell you what. That's your job, to ask, to listen, to sift through the noise until you reach something real. That's the work of a philosopher, not to deny the world, but to see it clearly, to remove the fog of assumptions, and to respond with intention. Judgments are sneaky. They wear the costume of truth, but they're often just defense mechanisms, stories created to protect you from uncertainty. If something bad happens and you immediately decide, I'm cursed, then you've wrapped the moment in meaning. But meaning is not fixed. You can rewrite it. You can replace panic with presence. You can turn insult into insight. But only if you slow down long enough to realize, this isn't the world attacking me. This is me interpreting a moment through a lens that may need to be cleaned. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. That's not just a quote, it's a life-saving truth. Because the moment you stop giving your judgments authority, you get your life back. You see the insult, but don't internalize it. You feel the setback, but don't catastrophize it. You see a flaw in yourself, but don't turn it into a sentence. This is where true freedom begins, not in changing the world, but in changing how you perceive it. The world is chaotic, people are flawed, life is unpredictable, but none of that has to decide your internal state. You don't need perfect circumstances to feel peace. You just need better interpretations, and those are within your power, always. So when something happens this week, pause. Before you react, ask yourself, what am I telling myself about this? Is it fact, or is it fear dressed up as truth? That moment of reflection might not change the event, but it will change how you carry it. And how you carry it changes everything. Judgment is a lens. Clean it often, check it carefully, and never forget, you can always choose a clearer view. You walk into a room and immediately scan the faces. You're not looking for danger, you're searching for approval. A nod, a smile, a flicker of interest. And if you get it, your chest lifts. If you don't, even slightly, something inside you shrinks. You tell yourself it's just being human, just being social, but there's something deeper happening here, something most people never question. You've outsourced your worth to the reactions of people who don't even know your name, and it's draining you, quietly, relentlessly. At some point, we all did it. We learned to survive by fitting in, by pleasing, by reading the room and adjusting ourselves like a mirror, reflecting what others wanted to see. And maybe it worked. For a while. You avoided conflict. You got the pat on the back. But slowly, almost invisibly, something else happened. You forgot what it felt like to speak without waiting for a reaction. You forgot how to move without checking if you were being watched. You started living like someone on stage, always performing, always waiting for applause. And that's not living, that's self-abandonment. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But becoming requires detachment, not coldness, not arrogance, just the calm strength of someone who no longer needs to be chosen to feel valuable. When you're ruled by opinions, you become a willing prisoner. The cage isn't locked. It's made of your own need to be liked. And the moment someone doesn't respond the way you hoped, that cage tightens. But the truth is, you're the one holding the key. You always have been. Seneca wrote, "He who seeks approval is dependent on others to live." And he didn't mean that connection is wrong. He meant dependency is. There's a line between valuing people and being owned by them, between empathy and erosion. And that line gets crossed every time you betray yourself just to keep someone comfortable. Every time you water yourself down, hold your tongue, or pretend to agree because silence feels safer than rejection. But peace doesn't come from being agreeable. It comes from being aligned with your values, with your voice, with your vision. There's a version of you that's waiting behind the curtain, not louder, not flashier, just more real. The one who speaks with clarity even when it shakes. The one who walks away when something feels off, even if it means standing alone. That version isn't interested in being admired, they're interested in being whole. And that shift, when you stop auditioning for roles that don't fit, is the beginning of true confidence. Not the kind that demands attention, the kind that doesn't need it. The world will always have something to say about your choices, your body, your work, your silence, your boldness. If you bend to every comment, you become a shapeshifter, not a person, and you will never feel grounded when your identity is built on sand. Approval is fickle. One day you're praised, the next you're questioned. You can't base your inner stability on something that changes with the wind. It's like trying to build a house during an earthquake. Nothing holds. Instead of asking, "Do they like me?" try asking, "Do I respect myself in this moment?" That question cuts deeper. It invites you to return to yourself, to your compass, because you can spend your life winning the crowd and still lose your soul. You can post, perform, please, and still lie awake at night wondering why it all feels hollow, because applause doesn't mean alignment, and being seen is not the same as being known. This is not a call to rebellion, it's a return to center. You're not here to impress, you're here to express, not to prove, but to embody. You don't need louder opinions, you need a quieter mind, one that doesn't flinch every time someone frowns, one that doesn't collapse when someone disagrees. That's the difference between seeking peace and being peace. One is outside in, the other is built from the inside out. You are not a product, you are not a brand, you are not a reflection of likes, shares, or nods of approval. You are a human being with depth, with contradictions, with a truth that can't always be simplified for others' comfort. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is not explain, not convince, just stand there, quietly rooted in who you are, even if no one claps. Think about how much time you've spent adjusting for others. Now imagine what that energy could do if it came back home to you. Imagine creating because it lights you up, not because it gets clicks. Speaking because it's true, not because it's safe. Showing up without the mask, without the filters, without the need for reassurance. That kind of life is not loud, but it's free. And freedom doesn't ask for permission. The path away from this dependency is not about isolation. It's about discernment. Knowing when to listen and when to let go. Knowing the difference between feedback that helps you grow and noise that keeps you small. Not everyone's opinion is worth your peace. Not every reaction deserves your adjustment. Not every rejection is a reason to shrink. You don't have to be cold to be free. You just have to stop negotiating your worth in every room you enter. The most powerful people aren't the ones who talk the most. They're the ones who don't flinch when misunderstood. They don't need to be the center of attention. They don't need validation like oxygen. They move with quiet authority, built on years of choosing integrity over popularity. That's not arrogance. That's self-respect. You've spent enough time editing yourself to fit into spaces that weren't built for you. It's time to build something of your own. A mindset, a mission, a life that doesn't require applause to feel alive. That doesn't crumble when it's questioned. That doesn't shift with every new opinion. You are not here to be liked. You are here to become. Becoming is not always visible, not always applauded, but it is always worth it, because once you stop begging the world to see you, you finally see yourself. And in that moment, something shifts. The cage disappears. The need quiets. The peace returns. Not because the world changed, but because you stopped giving it the keys. The strongest person in the room is often the quietest, not because they have nothing to say, but because they've already said it to themselves, deeply, over and over, until it no longer needs to be broadcast. In a world addicted to noise, arguments, performances, declarations of dominance, there is a rare kind of power that doesn't ask for attention. It simply is. It walks in stillness, listens more than it speaks, and moves with the calm presence of someone who doesn't need to prove anything anymore. That's real strength, and it's the kind most people overlook because it's not dramatic or flashy, but it's the kind that lasts. We're raised to believe that power is loud, that it takes up space, that it announces itself. But if you look closely at the people who've mastered themselves, who walk through life with true inner control, you'll notice something different. They don't rush to correct others. They don't panic when misunderstood. They don't enter conflict to win. They enter when necessary, and even then they do it with restraint. That kind of self-possession isn't natural. It's built, slowly, in silence, in discipline, in private moments when no one's watching. Seneca once said, "The greatest blessings of mankind are within us and within our reach." That includes strength. Not the kind you're told to display, but the kind you earn by facing yourself, by outgrowing your reactions, by not needing to be louder just to feel seen. Because when you're grounded, your presence does the talking. And there's nothing more unnerving than someone who cannot be provoked. They don't flinch. They don't chase validation. And when you speak to them, it feels like speaking to the earth. Solid, unmovable, steady. Strength isn't about being emotionless. It's about being unmoved by what doesn't matter. It's not about suppressing your feelings. It's about mastering them, letting them rise, letting them pass, and still choosing your response with clarity. That's not weakness, that's control. And control doesn't shout, it observes, it waits, it acts only when the action matters. We've been conditioned to associate silence with passivity, but there's another kind of silence, the kind that holds weight, the kind that makes people lean in. In 2026, you don't need more noise, you need less internal chaos, less reacting, less explaining. You need to be so aligned with who you are that you no longer argue with people committed to misunderstanding you. You no longer feel the urge to win every conversation, to dominate every room, to prove you're right. That urge is what weakens you. What strengthens you is the stillness that follows after you've let that go. Carl Jung once observed that loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important. And yet, those who walk the path of depth often realize they don't need to explain those things to everyone. They just need to live them. They embody what they value instead of preaching it. And in doing so, they communicate something more powerful than words ever could. Their life becomes the message. Their consistency becomes their signature. And their silence, unapologetic, peaceful, strong, becomes their presence. You don't need to be louder to be heard. You need to be clear within yourself, because clarity doesn't scream. It speaks once and then it moves on. That's the art of strength. To state your boundary without begging for it to be respected, to walk away without threatening, to lead without needing applause. That kind of strength doesn't rise from pride. It rises from purpose, and it's always rooted in something deeper than ego. Think of a tree that stands through storms. It doesn't yell back at the wind. It doesn't argue with the rain. It just remains. That's you, when you stop flinching every time someone tries to challenge you, when you realize you don't owe a response to every provocation, when you start choosing your energy like it costs something, because it does. Every time you get pulled into unnecessary conflict, every time you waste time defending your character to someone who never respected it, you lose a piece of your strength. And in 2026, you reclaim it, not by fighting louder, but by standing firmer. People often think power is about being fearless, but real power is about being calm in fear. It's not about never doubting yourself. It's about not acting from that doubt. It's about holding space for uncertainty without letting it run your life. It's about realizing that the most intimidating thing you can do is to stay steady when everything around you shakes. That's not indifference, that's mastery, and mastery is always quiet. The most dangerous opponent isn't the loudest one. It's the one who can't be manipulated, the one who doesn't take the bait, the one who knows exactly who they are and what they stand for, and refuses to be pulled into emotional chaos. That's what silence offers you. Not detachment, but leverage. Not apathy, but strategy. You can still care deeply and speak sparingly. You can still love fiercely and respond selectively. Silence doesn't mean you're afraid. Sometimes it means you're so grounded that nothing outside you can unseat you. And in the space between what happens and how you respond, silence becomes your weapon. Not passive silence, but intentional stillness. The kind that allows you to pause, assess, and respond from a place of wisdom instead of reflex. That's the kind of silence that builds your inner fortress, the kind that others sense and respect. 2026 isn't asking you to be more aggressive. It's asking you to be more anchored, to stop wasting your breath on things that don't move your mission forward, to let your results speak louder than your voice, to let your actions build your credibility, because when your focus is precise, your energy becomes intimidating. People will notice, not because you're demanding their attention, but because you're no longer asking for it. Let this year be the year you stop arguing with people who aren't building what you're building. Let it be the year you step out of the noise and into the rhythm of your own life. Let it be the year your stillness becomes your shield, because nothing shakes the world more than a person who cannot be shaken. And once you reach that place where your silence speaks for you, you'll understand that was the strength you were chasing all along. Most people try to survive their past. Few ever learn to love it. Because love, in this sense, doesn't mean approval. It doesn't mean liking what hurt you. It means refusing to be broken by it. It means refusing to waste another year resenting the things you cannot change. Amor fati, love of fate, isn't poetic. It's a decision, a discipline, a choice to not just accept the uncontrollable, but to harness it. It's what happens when you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What will I do with it now?" There's a moment, maybe quiet, maybe violent, where everything you expected falls apart. A betrayal, a loss, a collapse of plans you thought were secure. In that moment, your instincts will beg for escape. You'll want to rewind time, to choose differently, to erase pain. But you can't. No one can. And once you truly grasp that, you're faced with a deeper question. If I cannot change the past, will I let it control me, or will I learn to walk through it and come out stronger? Amor fati doesn't mean you enjoy the storm. It means you become the kind of person who grows because of it. You take the broken pieces and you build something new. You take the silence left behind by someone who walked away, and you learn to hear your own voice more clearly. You take the failure, and instead of letting it define you, you let it refine you. You begin to see that what felt like punishment was actually preparation. And with time, you stop seeing it as something that happened to you and start seeing it as something that awakened you. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "A blazing fire makes flame and brightness out of everything that is thrown into it." That is amor fati, not passive acceptance, but active transformation. To take even the worst experiences and use them as fuel, not to burn others, but to burn brighter. Because there's something powerful about a person who's walked through the fire and stopped asking for justice. They've moved beyond blame, beyond bitterness. And that movement doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from choosing to carry it differently. You were never meant to be untouched. You were meant to be tested, hardened, shaped. What broke your heart? What humbled your ego? What stripped away your illusions? That wasn't the end of your story. It was the beginning of a deeper one. And maybe you needed to lose your way to find a path that was never visible until you had nothing left to lose. The path that doesn't rely on control or perfection, but on courage and clarity. The path where you walk forward, not in spite of what happened, but because of it. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." And every day you remain chained to the fantasy of a different past, you stop yourself from becoming. Amor fati isn't blind optimism. It's radical acceptance. It's facing the wound and saying, "You don't scare me anymore." It's acknowledging pain without turning it into your identity. It's letting the story continue instead of freezing it in the moment of loss. You can spend a lifetime in resistance, fighting reality, denying what is, or you can take a breath, unclench your fists, and start building something new from exactly where you stand. Maybe the worst thing that ever happened to you also handed you the tools to build the strongest version of yourself. Maybe the very thing you hated the most was the thing that forced you to grow. Maybe that's what fate really is. Not a fixed path, but the raw material you're given to work with. And it's how you work with it that reveals who you are. You've been taught to chase what's easy, but nothing easy ever built depth. Nothing smooth ever carved wisdom into your bones. That comes from falling apart, from letting go, from sitting in silence long enough to hear your own voice again, from realizing that while you can't choose everything that happens, you can always choose what it makes of you. And the moment you do that, your entire relationship with life changes. You stop being afraid of loss. You stop being surprised by difficulty. You start meeting everything with a calm, steady heart, not because it's easy, but because you're no longer asking for easy. Epictetus reminded us, "Do not seek for events to happen as you wish. but wish for events to happen as they do, and your life will go smoothly. That's not a call to surrender. It's a call to align, to live in rhythm with what is instead of constantly fighting it, to find the opportunity in the obstacle, the clarity in the chaos, the strength in the sorrow. And once you see life through that lens, you stop wasting time trying to repaint the past. You start using it. Everything you've been through, every mistake, every heartbreak, every setback, it's not meant to be carried like a burden. It's meant to be mined for meaning. And that meaning is what makes you dangerous. Because the person who no longer fears fate cannot be manipulated. They cannot be broken by outcomes, because their power isn't tied to circumstances. It's tied to their ability to rise from them. This is the gift hidden inside Amor Fati, the freedom to no longer be a prisoner of your history, the courage to say, "This too is mine. I claim it. I use it. I turn it into fuel." You stop living as if life owes you an explanation. You stop waiting for everything to make perfect sense. Instead, you start creating meaning from the mess. And you build a self that can stand in the storm and say, "This didn't end me. It made me." Your past doesn't need to be rewritten. It needs to be re-understood. Not as the thing that held you back, but as the thing that forged your clarity. Every scar a sentence, every regret a redirection, every wound a whisper that led you back to yourself. That's the quiet power of fate. It shows you who you are beneath what you wanted. And when you can look at your life and say, "Even this I accept," you become untouchable, not because nothing can hurt you, but because nothing can own you anymore. So let this be the year you stop negotiating with reality. Let this be the year you stop waiting for a different past. Let this be the year you love your fate. Not because it was easy, but because it shaped you. Because it forced you to see what actually matters. Because it taught you how to rise without apology. And in that rise, you find something deeper than comfort. You find meaning. You find peace. You find the unshakable power that was buried beneath your resistance all along. Fear was never your enemy. It was your compass. A signal, not of danger necessarily, but of depth, of meaning, of something that matters enough to unsettle you. And the problem isn't fear itself, it's the relationship we've built with it. We treat fear like a wall, an indicator to retreat. But more often than not, it's a threshold, a test. And when you see it that way, everything changes. The Stoics didn't aim to erase fear, they aimed to reframe it. They knew fear wasn't weakness, it was misdirection. That trembling in your chest? It's not a warning to run, it's a message. There's something here, something important. So they trained for it. They used a practice called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. They imagined everything that could go wrong, not to scare themselves into paralysis, but to inoculate their minds. If you rehearse the fall, you rob it of its surprise. You strip the unknown of its power to control you. Fear feeds off surprise. It grows in shadows, in silence, in avoidance. But when you meet it with presence, with preparation, with intention, it shrinks. You realize that most fears are inflated, not by the events themselves, but by our exaggerated expectations of what they'll feel like, or how we'll survive them. We overestimate the pain. We underestimate our capacity to endure. And that gap is where fear lives, not in the moment, but in the mental forecast of it. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." Fear, when resisted, becomes a monster. But when confronted directly, it often reveals itself as something manageable. Maybe uncomfortable, but never impossible. The more we avoid what we fear, the more power it gains. But the more we prepare for it, the more ordinary it becomes. That's the paradox. Rehearsal makes fear familiar, and what's familiar no longer holds the same grip. Think about it. How many times have you dreaded something for days, weeks, even months, only to go through it and realize it wasn't nearly as bad as you imagined? That's not luck, that's proof. Proof that fear is often more illusion than fact, more smoke than fire, and the only way to break that illusion is to lean in, not recklessly but consciously, to say, let's see what happens when I don't run from this. Not because you're fearless, but because you're ready. You don't overcome fear by pretending it's not there. You overcome it by giving it a role. Fear becomes the starting point of a plan. It points you toward your next step, your next growth, your next layer of strength. And once you integrate it, you stop waiting for confidence to begin. You start building confidence by acting in the presence of fear, not in its absence. You can imagine the worst. You can walk yourself through failure, embarrassment, loss. You can stare down each scenario and ask, what would I do? How would I respond? What could I prepare now so that if it ever does happen, I won't be caught off guard? That's not negativity. That's strategy. And once you've faced it in your mind, you walk through life a little lighter, because if it comes, you're rehearsed. And if it doesn't, you're stronger just for preparing. So many people live in a constant hum of anxiety because they haven't looked fear in the eye. They carry vague worries like weightless fog, always present, never examined. But once you define it, you take away its ability to ambush you. You say, I've thought about this, I've sat with this, I've made peace with this, and I'm ready. That's where freedom starts, not in eliminating fear, but in confronting it so thoroughly that it no longer controls your choices. Seneca said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." And that line holds a quiet truth. Most fear is fiction, self-authored, made of assumptions and stretched-out scenarios that rarely materialize the way we imagine. But still, we give them power because we don't challenge them. Because we don't pause and say, let me test this fear. Let me walk it out to its end and see if it still deserves my paralysis. What happens when you stop seeing fear as a red light and start seeing it as a signpost? A clue, a message that says, there's something here worth exploring, something that scares you because it demands more of you. And when you feel that, when your hands shake and your breath quickens, don't pull away. Lean in. That edge you're standing on, it might be the boundary of your current self and the entrance to your next one. Strength isn't never being afraid. Strength is knowing what to do when fear shows up. It's rehearsing the worst, not to be morbid, but to become unshakable. It's acknowledging the risk, preparing for the storm, and then walking forward anyway. Because your life will never be free of risk, but it can be free of cowardice. It can be guided not by what you fear, but by what you choose to face. And once you start living that way, you realize something else, that most of the things you feared weren't even real. They were shadows, memories, doubts inherited from people who never had the courage to face their own. But you don't have to carry them anymore. You get to choose your fears. You get to face them. And in doing so, you start to feel something even deeper than courage. You start to feel calm. Because nothing surprises the mind that's already prepared. Let fear show you the gaps in your readiness, not your worth. Let it teach you what still needs strengthening, not what you should avoid. And most importantly, let it remind you that you're still growing, still expanding, still stepping into parts of yourself that were once locked behind old limitations. So if fear arises, don't shrink. Expand. Breathe deeper. Look it in the eye and say, I've met you before, and I'm not afraid of you anymore. Because fear was never the signal to stop. It was always the invitation to rise. Death has always been misunderstood. We think of it as the finish line, the final curtain, the vanishing. But it's not. It's the fire under your feet, the quiet ticking beneath every choice you hesitate to make. It's not the enemy, it's the urgency. And the more you try to forget it, the more life slips away unnoticed. Memento mori doesn't mean dwell in sorrow, it means awaken. Shake the sleep from your eyes and remember, all of this is temporary. And when you really grasp that, something shifts inside you. You stop assuming you'll have time to fix things later. You stop delaying the apology. You stop rehearsing your dreams for an audience that may never arrive. Suddenly, what matters becomes sharp, clear. You see that the weight you carry, resentment, pride, hesitation, is costing you the only thing you can't get back, time. And the fear of death, that starts to fade, because you're no longer wasting life pretending you have more of it. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but never beginning to live." That's the tragedy. Not that we die, but that we die full of things unsaid, untried, unloved. Death isn't the loss. The real loss is never showing up fully to what's right in front of us. And that's why memento mori isn't morbid, it's mercy. It reminds you that every moment matters. Every glance, every breath, every word is part of the only life you're given. Don't spend it on autopilot. There's a strange thing that happens when you remember death often. You become more alive, not reckless, not desperate, but intentional. Present, you eat slower, you listen deeper. You realize that no conversation is small because you never know which one will be your last. You start choosing what kind of person you want to be remembered as, not by someday, but by now. And that awareness, it changes everything. When you stop fearing death, you stop fearing rejection. You stop waiting for perfect timing. You realize there is no perfect time to start that book, take that leap, or say what you really feel. There's just now. And the truth is, tomorrow is a rumor, next year is a maybe. But today, this moment, this is yours. And if you don't use it, no one will use it for you. Life is not a rehearsal. This is the act. Carl Jung once said, "A man who is not conscious of his mortality is not truly alive." And that's the spiritual paradox of remembering death. It doesn't weigh you down. It wakes you up. You realize you don't need to chase significance. You just need to show up. With presence, with truth, with courage. Because when you live like you're dying, you stop compromising. You start honoring your path, not because you're sure it will succeed, but because you're sure you don't want to waste time pretending to be someone you're not. You begin to notice that most people don't really live. They exist. They wait for permission, for the weekend, for someone to choose them. And all the while, the clock ticks, the years pass, and the soul contracts. But it doesn't have to. You can reverse the numbness by remembering what's at stake. You can step back into the fire, not the fire of panic, but of purpose. You don't need more time. You need more clarity about how you're using the time you already have. When death becomes your teacher, every moment becomes a question. Is this how I want to spend my life? Complaining, scrolling, pleasing people who wouldn't notice if I vanished? Or do I want to start living deliberately, creating memories I'd be proud to take to the grave? That's the gift of mortality. It sharpens your gaze. You stop chasing forever, and you start pouring your soul into now. Seneca reminded us, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." And those words cut deeper than any warning, because they expose a truth we don't like to face. We're not running out of life because of death. We're running out because we give our energy to things that don't matter. We gossip, we argue, we procrastinate, not realizing that every act of distraction is an act of surrender. We trade time for nothing, and then wonder why we feel empty. But the moment you take mortality seriously, everything unimportant starts falling away. The drama, the noise, the fear of what people think. You begin to live lighter, not because life is easier, but because you've stopped carrying what doesn't belong to you. You're no longer afraid to speak your truth, to take risks, to let go of things you once thought were permanent, because you know nothing is. And that knowledge, it sets you free. Even love changes when you remember death. You hold people closer. You stop needing to be right. You realize that every goodbye could be the last, so you soften your tone, you forgive faster, and you mean what you say. You live in such a way that if you had to leave tomorrow, you'd leave no room for regret. That doesn't come from panic. It comes from wisdom, from the deep, calm understanding that you were never promised more time. And that's exactly what makes today sacred. This awareness doesn't make you somber. It makes you fierce. It makes you clear-eyed. And it gives you the strength to walk away from anything that wastes your life's fire. You stop tolerating relationships that drain you. You stop participating in roles that shrink you, because you realize you don't owe anyone your silence. You owe yourself your aliveness. Even your failures begin to look different. They're not endings. They're proofs that you tried, that you risked, that you weren't asleep. And when you carry the weight of your mortality with grace, you stop obsessing over outcomes. You start showing up for the process, not because it's easy, but because it's real, it's yours, and it's worth everything. Aristotle once believed that the good life was not about length, but about virtue, about living well. And living well isn't about luxury or success. It's about alignment, about honoring what you value, even when it's hard, about walking the path you believe in, even when it's lonely. Because when the final moment comes and you look back, you won't remember how perfect you were. You'll remember how present you were, how true, how alive. So don't waste this. Don't scroll past your life waiting for better timing. Don't silence your soul to fit a version of yourself you've outgrown. Let death teach you urgency, not fear. Let it remind you that this is it, not in a way that scares you, but in a way that wakes you up so completely you never fall asleep at the wheel of your life again. Because the point of remembering death is not to mourn what you'll lose, it's to fully see what you have, and to give it everything, not someday, not when you're ready, but now, this minute, this heartbeat, because that's all any of us really get, and that's more than enough. There are times in life when the world becomes loud with confusion, when your mind feels pulled in a dozen directions and everything seems urgent, but nothing feels meaningful. In those moments, we forget that the ancient philosophers weren't giving us theories to admire. They were offering lifelines, maps for survival. When the Stoics spoke of the four virtues, wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, they weren't crafting a philosophy of comfort. They were teaching us how to live when life gets messy, uncertain, and hard. These virtues weren't decorations. They were anchors, and if you don't cling to something solid, you'll drift. Wisdom isn't about knowing everything. It's about seeing clearly. When chaos knocks at your door, wisdom lets you pause, take a breath, and ask, not what feels good, but what's true, not what's easy, but what's right. It's the ability to observe yourself when you want to react, to step outside your emotion long enough to choose your response. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." That's the power of wisdom. It doesn't remove the obstacle, but it shows you how to use it. Courage is what follows, because knowing what's right doesn't make it easy. Wisdom can see the path, but courage walks it. When you're afraid of the fallout, when doubt starts whispering louder than your instincts, courage is what moves your feet anyway. You show up scared. You speak when your voice shakes. You take the first step not because you're fearless, but because something inside you refuses to keep living small. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's the decision that something else matters more, and when you act with courage, you start trusting yourself again. That quiet voice gets stronger. Then comes justice, the virtue we neglect when we're hurt. When someone lies to you, betrays you, or lets you down, the first instinct is retaliation. You want to level the field. You want them to feel what you felt. But justice is not vengeance. Justice is restraint guided by principle. It's choosing to be fair even when no one's watching. It's making decisions based not on emotion, but on balance. Seneca once said, "No man is crushed by misfortune unless he has first been deceived by prosperity." Justice reminds you not to act from temporary feelings. It helps you lead from a steady place, from strength, not spite. And finally, temperance, the forgotten virtue in a world addicted to extremes. In the face of indulgence, in the temptation of excess, temperance holds the line. It's the voice that tells you, more doesn't mean better, faster doesn't mean wiser. It's the discipline to stop when you've had enough, to say no when it would be easier to keep going, to walk away before your desires own you. And this is where it all comes together. These four, wisdom, courage, justice, temperance, are not boxes to check. They are modes of being. They aren't reserved for monks or philosophers. They are for anyone who wants to stop reacting and start living with intention. In the face of noise, they give you silence. In the face of pressure, they give you poise. You won't always get it right. Sometimes you'll fall short. But the point isn't perfection. It's alignment. Alignment means your actions mirror your values. Your choices reflect your truth. You don't just say you want peace. You act in ways that protect it. You don't just admire resilience. You cultivate it when no one's clapping. You live in such a way that your internal compass doesn't need to be explained. People feel it. You become rooted, clear, and hard to shake. The beauty of the four virtues is that they cover all terrain. Confused? You lean on wisdom. Scared? You call on courage. Betrayed? You choose justice. Tempted? You return to temperance. That's how you stay grounded when the world spins. That's how you live a life that doesn't fracture under pressure. You don't wait for the perfect moment to be better. You choose to practice these virtues now, quietly, daily, especially when no one is watching. Carl Jung once said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." And that's the quiet test of virtue. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up in your habits, in your reactions, in the way you treat people when you're tired. Virtue is lived, not declared. It becomes the invisible structure that holds your life together when things fall apart. And they will fall apart. That's not a question. What matters is what you've trained yourself to become when they do, because life will always test you. You'll be pulled by desire, blinded by emotion, lured by shortcuts. And if you don't have a framework to return to, you'll chase anything that promises relief. That's how we become lost, when we trade principle for comfort and wonder why we feel so hollow. But if you choose virtue, not as a performance, but as a practice, you stop being tossed around by the world. You become your own compass. And that kind of clarity, it's rare, it's powerful, it's quiet. You don't need a crisis to begin. You don't need approval to live this way. You just need a decision. A commitment to choose better, even if only in small moments. To pause before reacting, to breathe before judging, to check in with your values before letting your emotions speak for you. That's how you build a life that holds its shape under pressure. There's something deeply peaceful about knowing that you're living by something deeper than impulse, that you're not just reacting to the world, you're responding from within. And when you begin to live this way, you realize you don't need to control everything. You don't need to fix everyone. You just need to stay true to the path. Your path, the one shaped not by trends, but by timeless truths. And slowly, people start to notice, not because you're louder, but because you're calmer, not because you're perfect, but because you're steady. Your presence becomes a mirror, a reminder that strength doesn't have to shout, that integrity can be silent and still move mountains, and that living a good life isn't about having less pain. It's about facing life with more wisdom, more courage, more justice, and more discipline than yesterday. You become someone others trust, not because you have the answers, but because you've chosen to live the questions with character. You're not chasing perfection, you're honoring the practice. And in a world that's obsessed with what's trending, that's a rebellion. A quiet, powerful rebellion. The kind that builds something that lasts. So when the day feels heavy, return to the virtues. Let them guide you back. When you're unsure, ask yourself, not what feels good, but what feels true. You already know the way. You just have to choose it, not once, but again and again. That's how you become unshakable. Not by avoiding the storm, but by learning how to stand inside it with a steady heart. You're going to feel it, that wave of heat when someone disrespects you, the sting in your chest when you're overlooked, the silent burn of comparison when someone else wins while you wait. These moments are human. Emotion isn't a flaw in your design, it's a signal that something inside you is alive. But here's where we get it wrong. We think strength is not feeling, that stoicism means becoming numb, shutting down, pushing away every flicker of discomfort. That's not discipline, that's denial, and denial has a cost. It builds pressure in the shadows of your mind until it breaks through, not as clarity, but as chaos. Because what you don't face will find its way out. And usually, it chooses the worst time to speak. Stoicism never taught you to run from emotion. It taught you how to welcome it with clarity. To open the door, nod your head, let it speak, but never hand it the wheel. The goal isn't to become a machine. It's to become a master of your own response. In every reaction, there's a sliver of space, a breath, a blink, a brief silence between the rise of the feeling and the movement of your body. That space is where power lives. It's where choice waits. And if you miss that moment, if you fill it with noise or rush past it to satisfy a craving, you lose more than composure. You lose alignment. You drift from who you are into who you've been trained to be by fear, ego, and habit. That's the real danger, not emotion itself, but the reflex that follows when you stop thinking clearly. You'll hear people say, "I just had to say it. I couldn't help myself." But that's not truth. It's surrender. It's the language of someone who gave their power to a moment, who traded long-term peace for short-term release. That's not freedom. That's being ruled by your own unexamined mind. And if you keep acting on impulse, you start to believe that chaos is normal, that being controlled by your emotions is just part of being human. But it's not. It's just common. There's a difference. You were made for more than reactivity. The Stoics didn't strive for emotional suppression. They trained for emotional transformation. When anger showed up, they studied it. When jealousy stirred, they examined the story beneath it. When fear whispered, they leaned in with awareness instead of retreating with shame. That's the art. Not to avoid the storm, but to become someone who can stand inside it without being thrown around by the wind. Impulse wants immediacy. It wants a reaction now. It doesn't care about consequences. It wants to be fed. It's quick, loud, and often wrong. But discipline is different. Discipline waits. It watches. It doesn't need applause because it's not trying to perform. It's trying to preserve what matters most: your peace, your integrity, your path. Every time you pause instead of react, You build that discipline, not with force, but with clarity. Imagine living in a world where people acted only on impulse, where anger always became violence, where sadness always became withdrawal, where insecurity always became attack. That world wouldn't last. And yet many live in versions of it daily, not because they are bad, but because they've never been shown another way. You don't have to be one of them. You can practice something different, something ancient, something powerful. Emotion becomes dangerous only when it becomes command, when you stop questioning it, when you obey it without reflection. That's where regret is born, not from feeling, but from failing to pause. The person who hurt you isn't the one in charge of your life, you are. But only if you take responsibility for what you do with the energy they leave behind. That's real strength, not clenching your jaw, not bottling everything up until it explodes, but opening the door to the feeling, listening, learning, and then choosing your response. Not from pride, not from fear, but from truth. Seneca once wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." Your emotions are not interruptions to your growth. They are invitations to it. They show you what still controls you, what still unsettles you, what still owns too much of your mind. But they also show you your edges, your potential, your capacity to hold discomfort without running from it. And each time you do, you reclaim a part of yourself that was once lost in the noise. Don't fear emotion. Fear the story that says you are powerless in its presence, that you must obey it to be real. That feeling deeply means acting recklessly. It doesn't. Some of the strongest people feel more than anyone, but they've learned how to hold it, to sit with it, to walk through it without becoming it. That's what makes them grounded. It's what makes them trusted. It's what makes them unshakable in a world that's always moving too fast. The truth is, you don't become free by avoiding pain. You become free by facing it with awareness, by choosing your next move from presence, not panic. And when you do, the emotion loses its control. It may still visit, but it won't stay, and it won't define you. That's what the Stoics knew. That's what you can learn. The power isn't in feeling less. It's in using the space between the feeling and the action to choose your life instead of reacting to it. It won't be perfect. Some days you'll snap. You'll say too much. You'll retreat when you wanted to rise. That's part of the process. The goal isn't to erase every mistake. The goal is to return to awareness faster each time, to shorten the gap between reaction and reflection, to learn your triggers and respond to them like a student, not a victim. That's how you grow. That's how you break cycles. That's how you become someone you trust. Emotions are messengers, but you are the author. And once you realize that, everything begins to change. You no longer move through life fearing your own mind. You start moving through it with understanding, with patience, with clarity. That's what real control feels like. Not forcing everything to be still, but learning to be still within whatever rises. There is a quiet confidence that comes from not being owned by what you feel, not denying it, not drowning in it, but standing in it, breathing through it, choosing your words, choosing your next step. Not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because you've decided to live in alignment with who you want to be. And that decision, that's the most powerful one you'll ever make. Because while the world will try to provoke you, test you, confuse you, your job is simple. Stay grounded, stay clear, and use the space. Use the space between emotion and action to lead yourself toward the kind of life you won't have to explain. One built not on impulse, but on intention. One where you don't fear your emotions, you guide them. And in doing so, you become something most people never even attempt to be. calm in chaos, clear in conflict, unmoved by noise, and deeply, profoundly alive. Most people hear the word discipline and immediately recoil. They imagine it as something cold, harsh, or rigid, a life of saying no, a life of restriction. But that's not what it is, not truly. Real discipline isn't punishment, it's protection. It's not about depriving yourself of freedom, it's how you actually earn it. Without discipline, your desires become your rulers. You say yes when you shouldn't. You delay what matters. You abandon the path for comfort that never lasts. You become a passenger in your own life, tossed around by impulse, distraction, and momentary pleasure. But with discipline, you reclaim the wheel. When you choose discipline, you build something rare, self-trust. Not just the kind that shows up when everything's calm, but the kind that steadies you when the world is pulling you in 100 directions. The kind that says, no matter what comes, I will show up for myself. And that's when things start to shift. You walk into a room, not with arrogance, but with alignment. You speak with clarity. You move with purpose. You no longer need to chase anything because your life begins to reflect your inner order. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it does mean you're no longer scattered. You're centered. Carl Jung said, in each of us, there is another whom we do not know. That unknown self, the deeper, stronger, clearer version of you, can only be reached through discipline. It's the path that connects who you are now with who you're meant to be. And the bridge is built, one decision at a time. Not dramatic declarations, not chasing perfection, just quiet, consistent alignment with your values. Each time you wake up early when you don't feel like it, each time you say no to the thing that tempts you off course, each time you keep a promise to yourself that no one else knows about, you carve out that deeper version, and in time they begin to lead. Discipline gives you boundaries, not to trap you, but to anchor you. In a world that glamorizes chaos, doing what's necessary, without applause, without drama, is a quiet rebellion. Everyone wants the result. Few want the structure. But the Stoics knew, structure is the soil of greatness. A tree doesn't become strong by growing in every direction. It becomes strong by staying rooted, by reaching down before it reaches up. You don't need more options. You need fewer, better ones. You don't need 100 paths. You need one you're willing to walk every day, even when it's boring, even when no one's watching. There's this illusion we're sold that real freedom is doing whatever we want, whenever we want. But look closely. The people who live that way often feel the most empty, because freedom without direction is chaos, and chaos over time becomes suffering. You stay up late, eat whatever, skip what matters, give in to the same distractions, and you wonder why you feel anxious, weak, or lost. It's not mystery, it's math. Without discipline, your energy is spent reacting. With it, your energy is invested creating. That's the difference. Discipline isn't just about saying no, it's about saying yes to the life you actually want. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." That mastery doesn't come from a single moment of willpower. It comes from rhythm, from choosing discomfort today to build peace tomorrow, from practicing the small things until the big things don't scare you, from understanding that if you can command your habits, you can command your future. Discipline sharpens the mind. It steadies the heart. It teaches you how to endure boredom, navigate pressure, and resist the urge to quit when it's inconvenient. That's where real strength is built, in silence, in repetition, in the sacred space between excuse and execution. It's not glamorous, and that's the point. The strongest people you'll ever meet don't wear their discipline like a costume. They carry it like a compass. They don't need to talk about it. You can feel it in the way they move, the way they speak, the way they refuse to be pulled out of alignment by noise. They've built their identity on something deeper than mood or approval. They don't need motivation because they have commitment. They don't need to prove anything to the world because they're too busy proving something to themselves. Most of the pain we experience doesn't come from doing too little. It comes from knowing what we need to do and avoiding it. That tension, that inner pull between who you are and who you could be, doesn't go away with time. It grows until you either numb it or face it. Discipline is how you face it. Not with force, but with honesty. It's looking in the mirror and saying, I don't need to be perfect, but I refuse to be passive. It's not about controlling every outcome. It's about controlling what you bring to each moment. Your focus, your presence, your effort. That's what you own. That's your power. And when you begin to live this way, when your habits align with your values, you begin to feel something rare. Peace. Not the peace of everything being easy, but the peace of knowing you're no longer betraying yourself. That's the reward of discipline. Not applause, not external validation, but inner stillness. The kind of stillness that can't be faked. The kind that whispers, you're on your path, keep going, you'll still fail, you'll still fall off track. That's part of the work. But now you don't spiral, you don't hide. You get back up, not out of guilt, but because your identity has changed. You're no longer someone who needs perfect conditions to act. You act because you've decided to, because you've seen what life looks like when you drift, and you've made a quiet vow never to live that way again. Discipline, then, isn't something you add to your life. It becomes the foundation of it, the invisible structure that gives shape to everything else. Relationships, health, work, peace. None of it lasts without discipline, but with it, you build something durable, something true, something that carries you through storms and keeps you grounded in moments of doubt. And that's the real freedom. Not needing to escape your life because you finally built one you respect. Not needing constant stimulation because you're no longer afraid of silence. Not needing shortcuts because you've made peace with the long way. That's what discipline does. It teaches you how to be okay with who you are without needing anything extra to feel whole. So the next time it feels hard, the next time your mind says, skip it, you've done enough, or you can try again later, remember this: every excuse is just a delay in becoming who you already are beneath the noise. And every moment you choose discipline, you're not just building habits, you're returning home to your higher self, the self that doesn't need chaos, the self that doesn't chase, the self that quietly and clearly knows exactly what needs to be done and does it again and again. Until one day you look back, not with regret, but with respect for the life you earned through every quiet yes, every powerful no, and every single moment you chose alignment over comfort. That's what freedom really looks like, and it starts with discipline. You are not a finished product. You never were. You never will be. You are a work in motion, not a label to be stamped, not a box to be checked. You are not your worst day, not your deepest wound, not even your greatest victory. You are something far more powerful. You are the one holding the chisel. Life hands you the marble, often raw, heavy, and cracked in places. It doesn't arrive polished. It doesn't arrive easy. But that's not the point. The point is that you are the sculptor, and the sculpture is your life. Most people don't realize this. They walk around thinking they are the stone, that what happened to them defines them, that they are stuck in the shape the world carved for them, too poor, too broken, too late, too far gone. But none of those things are true unless you accept them as final, unless you put the chisel down and walk away. And that's the quiet tragedy. Not the marble itself, but the person who forgets they can shape it. You weren't born with a fixed form. You were born with tools, thought, action, reflection, and the courage to start again. It's easy to blame the marble, to point to the cracks and chips and say, "Look what life gave me." But the Stoics never taught us to look outward for answers. They taught us to return inward, to say, "This is what I've been given. Now what will I do with it?" Your decisions are not small. They are strokes of the chisel. Every morning you wake up early to protect your peace instead of drowning in distractions. That's a cut. Every time you choose discipline over indulgence, that's a refinement. Every moment you catch yourself before reacting in anger or fear and instead breathe, pause, and choose a higher response, you're sculpting. And over time, those daily choices accumulate. They reveal something. A shape begins to form. And it looks more and more like the person you were meant to be. The chisel is not always obvious. Sometimes it's the silence you keep when you want to defend yourself. Sometimes it's the boundary you set even when your voice shakes. Sometimes it's simply choosing not to quit. One more rep, one more hour, one more step. These moments may seem forgettable, but they are not. They are defining. Because while the world watches for explosions and applause, the sculptor knows greatness is shaped in the quiet, in the grind, in the space between noise and clarity. No one else can sculpt your life for you. They can give opinions, they can offer tools, they can even criticize your process, but they don't hold your hands. Only you do. Only you decide if today's choices will echo regret or resilience. Only you can choose to carry the chisel when it would be easier to point fingers. And that's the power people forget they have. The power to shape themselves through action, not through avoidance. You are allowed to evolve, allowed to change shape, allowed to say, "I no longer want to live like this." That's not failure. That's mastery. Because sculptors don't cling to every mistake. They don't panic when a piece breaks off. They adjust. They reimagine. They adapt the vision. That's what it means to be human. To stay flexible in form but grounded in purpose. To understand that your masterpiece is not behind you. It's in every future moment you choose to pick up the chisel again. The problem is never that the marble is flawed. It's that we forget how much can be done with imperfect material. Think of the people who've been through trauma, loss, abandonment, yet they became light for others. Not because life was kind, but because they turned pain into polish. They didn't sculpt perfection, they sculpted meaning. That's what real artistry looks like. Not symmetry, but soul. Not surface, but substance. Too many wait for better marble, a better time, a cleaner slate. But waiting is not shaping. Waiting is how the marble sits untouched, and nothing erodes potential faster than neglect. Life doesn't ask you to wait. It asks you to engage, to do what you can with what you have, where you are. Because while others are waiting for a perfect block of stone, you can be chiseling. While they wait to feel ready, you can be creating. Sculpting clarity out of chaos, stillness out of stress, purpose out of pain. And no, it won't always look beautiful while you're shaping it. Sometimes the dust gets in your eyes. Sometimes a piece chips off that you thought was essential. But that's how masterpieces are made. Not in theory, in motion, in mess, in the raw moments that don't make it to the highlight reel. You don't need a blueprint. You need a commitment to not let your life become a lump of wasted potential. So take this year, take 2026, and do more than survive it. Sculpt it. Don't just get through the days. Shape them, design them, turn routine into ritual, turn struggle into strategy, turn silence into strength. There is no secret tool coming. You already have what you need: thought, choice, and time. Time, most of all, because you don't have forever. The marble is not infinite. Every day you let pass is a piece of it gone, but every day you choose to shape it, that's a form of legacy. Let your habits reflect your sculpture. Let them chip away at the unnecessary. Let them reveal your outline, not the version of you that conforms, pleases, or hides, but the one that stands still in the storm and says, "This is who I've decided to be." That version won't come by accident. It will come by effort, repetition, attention, patience. There's a quiet power in knowing that the future is not something you find, it's something you carve. Not all at once, but day by day, hour by hour,